essentially, we used to be like two separate camps, DSOMM and SAMM, and we've decided to join. And then the first thing that we would like to bring you guys is what is each of the model doing, and then how do they compare to each other, which is the better model. Now we're not going to go there. What are the properties of the model? What are the use cases of the model? How is each model used? And then give you some high-level overview of, to get you a little bit of a feeling of the differences actually. And there are two parts of the presentation, well actually three. First we will give you a quick introduction, a high-level introduction to SAMM and DSOMM. And then we will do, that's the second part, a hands-on assessment. We have it prepared, where you will use both models to do an assessment, which is very, very scoped, so we're not going to do a full assessment, it's going to be a small thing. Just to give you a little bit of feeling. And we have no idea how that's going to work out, because we know the model pretty well, so each of us did the scoring of theirs, like I did SAMM, I did DSOMM, but then we did it together and everything made sense. Well, we also know very well SAMM, right? But we'll see how that works. And then we're going to talk about how the models compare to each other, what are the differences, how you can use each model, and how do they go hand in hand together. I'm not going to give you the word yet, Timo. I'll just go with the SAMM part, and then you'll get the word. You might add something. All right, SAMM, introduction to SAMM. Who has zero knowledge of SAMM? Who doesn't know SAMM at all? Who has done a SAMM assessment? Okay, so that's like, I know where you are guys, like 2 thresholds. I'm gonna not go as far as doing SAMM assessments, but for people who did SAMM assessments, the exercise is gonna feel at least a little bit easier. So maybe when we split into group, it's gonna be a group exercise. You should maybe go with someone who did the SAMM assessment. What is SAMM essentially? It's a framework or a model. And what is a model or a framework? I used to have a problem understanding. It's like framework, what is a framework? Essentially, it's a collection of best practices which is structured in a specific way. And then something that also SAMM adds to that are 3 key qualities. First of all, it brings you measurability. You could have a framework which is not really measurable. Think of NIST 853, which is a collection of controls. You can't really measure anything. You could though, but SAMM has that baked in, so you can use SAMM to come up with a single number or a list of numbers that characterize how secure your team is that you're assessing in terms of processes, responsibilities, and tooling that goes around with that. So that's the first key characteristic of SAMM. The second characteristic is that it's actionable, so it doesn't really only tell you, okay, you measured it, good job, you're here. That's not where you want to end, right? You actually want to do that to improve, to see how far you should go. So SAMM is also going to give you actionable guidance on how to improve. And then the final characteristics, which is essential, because we're going to now later on come to DSOMM, it's made to be versatile. So SAMM was designed to be not specific to an organization, not specific to a certain development process or technology. So, which already gives you an idea that it is positioned somewhat at a higher level. Which means SAMM is not going to give you details of, okay, you need to implement a secure build by creating a pipeline in your GitHub and so on and so forth. It's going to just say you should harden your build and it should be automated, for instance. SAMM's structure, for people who are from, I think nobody raised their hand that they don't know SAMM, so I'm going to go pretty quick here. It has 5 business functions which are split in security practices, exactly 3. The model is completely symmetric. There are 2 streams, and the concept of stream is it's a grouping of those best practices that I mentioned. It just groups some type of best practices together that go logically nicely together. And then it has 3 of those best practices or 3 activities which are spread in 3 maturity levels with progressive complexity. So typically level 1 is the easiest, and then you build up with level 2, and then level 3 is the hardest one. It requires most work. This is what the full model looks like. Remember I said business functions at the top, 5 of them, and then 3 security practices, 2 streams. Everyone has 2 streams. And then under each stream, you have these 3 activities in progressive complexity and maturity levels. Which means that every smaller box, every stream, if we zoom in further, then we have these 3 levels like I've mentioned. And if we pick software dependencies, for instance, because that is going to be the exercise, so all of my examples, or our examples are with software dependencies. Level 1 is about an ad hoc approach to that, and I'll come back to it later in a second because I have them on slides, all of the levels. Level 2, and this is recurring in all SAMM activities. So level 1 means you are doing something, it's ad hoc, you are not super systematic about it, you just start it. Level 2 is about making it efficient and effective, you have something more going on in terms of a process. And then level 3 is comprehensive mastery, which means in SAMM it's typically about making sure that you start to integrate that activity with many other things. So there is like, you start to interconnect all your SAMM activities and you have a lot of feedback loops here and there between these activities to improve, obviously. By the way, security is not a one and done thing. If you measure today, you get a certain score, you need to keep on working to retain that score. And I don't think that's anywhere in the SAMM model. I'm looking at Seba, but he's not paying attention. But I think it should be added. So if you measure today, you have a score, I don't know, 1.25. If you do nothing next year, you don't have that 125. We're taking it away. Yes. So even level 3 is much harder on that. Level 3 says you constantly have to keep on going. You need to fuel your fire. Okay, let's look briefly at these 3 levels for one stream, which is the software dependencies. And the first level 1 in software dependencies is, do you know which dependencies you have basically? Do you know what dependencies you're using in your code base for a specific application? And then SAMM, again, I think most of you are familiar with SAMM. You have 4 answers always, and its first one is a no. And then you have yes, which gives you some coverage. Yes for some, yes for half, and yes for most. But then this question on its own, it's very vague. So if you just look at the question and if you give it to 10 people, they might come back with 10 different answers. Well, there are 4 answers, okay, so you might get them spread in these answers. This is why SAMM also has the quality criteria that tell you the definition of done. So you need to check every box next to this quality criteria to go to anything but no. And for dependencies, level 1 says you have a bill of material for every application. You can quickly find out what are the vulnerabilities that affect your application. And then you analyze, you address the findings of these dependencies once every 3 months. I had a team that I did an assessment, and they said, yeah, we do that. We know we have SBOMs, and we know which vulnerabilities are affected. Yeah, we have findings. Do you address them? It depends. Sorry, you don't get level 1. That's a great example to give you an idea that you really need these criteria. Just having a tool that does the job doesn't give you level 1 by default. That's why we have this criteria. Okay, moving on to level 2. Like I said, level 2 is effectiveness, efficiency. Here you're no longer playing around in a way, between air quotes. So you have something more formal going on. Again, same answers, I'm not going to repeat that. So the quality criteria make it define this question again. And then a couple of interesting ones here is I'm lost, but it should say that you need to have a, sorry, it's in the question. You need to have a formal process for approving dependencies. Saying, John eyeballed it and it was good, that is not a formal process. Formal process should have at least some criteria that you all agreed on, like number of contributors in the GitHub, number of stars, whatever you pick. I mean, as long as it's formalized in a certain way, that's what you need, and that is essential. I'm not sure it's here, but it's part of the question. Sorry, it's here. You need to have a pre-approved list of dependencies, which means you need to have approval criteria. And then you need to have license changes, and by the way, many companies do this because it's compliance and stuff, which is like somehow it's more important than security. So license process, so formalization about licensing is always there, but formalization about you are allowed to use these dependencies is rarely there. And then you have a couple of other criteria. I'm not going to go through all of them, but you track unmaintained dependencies and then you flag them, and then your team has to also go around and say, okay, actually these dependencies are never used, let's kill them, let's throw them out. And level 3 is even harder, and the question is not that great because it says you prevent the build You break the build if you find a dependency which is vulnerable. But then an essential quality criteria is that you need to scan the source code of your dependencies with a static analysis tool. So you need to treat it as if it's your own code. You bring in these dependencies, you don't say, it's done. You need to look into them and see, do we really, really trust this? And this goes to a higher level, and obviously you need to break the build and not allow building. Almost there with SAMM, the scoring, so no, some, few, and most, this is how it works. You get some partial scores, you get a 1 for most and 0 for no. Again, I think nobody raised their hand that they don't know SAMM, so there's the scoring there. I'm not going to explain it. And then, so once you do score, there are 90 questions in total, 90 activities. You're going to end up with something that looks like this, bar charts with scores for every business function, and then you can also clearly zoom in so you can get very specific details. You can use the Excel spreadsheet, or there is also open source tools that can get you started. And what you can do with this essentially, so you evaluate it, it's just a starting point, and then you start building a gap analysis, and the yellow dots indicate your gap in this case, just to give you an idea. This is, for instance, a gap. And then you start improving towards clearing that gap, closing that gap. You can also demonstrate these improvements, so you can go to your C-level and the board and say, hey, this is how we improved, so give us more money. It works, I'm not kidding. And you can also show them these charts, obviously, how you're progressing. Something that I've recently heard is apparently a company was using SAMM to negotiate cheaper premiums for their cybersecurity insurance, which is amazing. If you're interested, I can share you the details later on. I think that's it. You can also use SAMM for merger and acquisition assessments. And I'm going to give you now the word to Timo, who's going to tell us sort of similar level, high-level overview of DSOMM.
I need to come to this side because on that side I get.
Yes, I'm going to sit down.
You sit down. Okay. Now turn off my mic. All right. Who of you performed the DSOMM assessment? Couple, okay, not everyone. All right, so I'm going to explain a bit about it before we come to the differences. DSOMM stands for DevSecOps Maturity Model, and we have to go in the other direction. So why have I invented DSOMM originally? Because I used to operate Linux systems, and I used to be a developer, and I thought, how do I enhance security in DevOps strategies, and how can I utilize DevOps strategies to make it better, and what do I do first, right? That is the main question of maturity models. What came out is a maturity model now. You see that we have DevOps dimensions, so that's a big difference here to other maturity models, because I focus on that developers and operations people can understand the model. While from my feelings, SAMM is maybe more written from security people for security people. Then under the DevOps dimension, we have a sub-dimension in order to categorize a bit better. And then we have 5 levels with multiple activities inside. As I said, we have DevOps dimensions, so we have the dimension build and deployment, culture and organization, information gathering, hardening, and test and verification. Some might overlap with SAMM, like test and verification, you have a tight coupling, while others don't overlap directly. Here we have the metrics view of DSOMM. DSOMM comes with an application and the maturity data. This is a sample of the application. You see here one dimension, the build and deployment dimension, with a sub-dimension deployment, and then you see the multiple levels, level 1 to 5. We have a filter here, so I filtered for inventory, and we have 3 activities for inventory. The first inventory is inventory of production components. So when I come to an organization and I ask which applications do you have, and the answer is we don't know, then you don't have level 1. if they say, hey, here's a wiki page, then with this applications listed, you don't need details, just these are the applications and they are running there. On this platform, then it's implemented. So I say it's implemented, or not implemented mostly. Then on the next level, you know already the composition of that application, for example, multiple services, maybe an image, and in the last one on level 3, you actually have an inventory of the dependencies inside of that image. And you know that it's running in production right now. That's very important. All right, then we have another view that is the spider web diagram with a heat map inside. So you see the different levels and the different dimensions or sub-dimensions. Here this is just a sample to see how it could look. As more green it is, as more is implemented in that cell. So like this, you can see, hey, maybe here, if this would be green, that is not so useful as the ones which are on the lower levels, because I see that often that people are doing things which are, for their maturity level, maybe not the right thing to do in that moment. The model takes into account how much effort it is to implement that activity and how useful it is for security. And the dependencies, because sometimes you cannot implement something before you have implemented something else. So here, you need a defined build process in order to scan the static composition analysis. If the build process is not defined, you might miss source code or components you want to scan. So you have sometimes dependencies. Here you have the defined build process, and then, as I said, here's the static analysis for important server-side components on level 2. All right. Aram, let's do a hands-on assessment.